whole lot of different ends. And so why do we focus just on and so when the primary good shares of people are fair, when these resource holdings are fair, then it's fair, and we don't look beyond that. As Rawls says, justice does not look behind the distribution of resources and liberties to measure, much less to maximize, the quality of lives people obtain by the use of their resources and liberties. What quality of life you get given a fair distribution of resources and the maintenance of a fair framework of interaction, that's up to you. That's sort of your responsibility, not the rest of us or society. Each person has a non-delegable responsibility for the conduct of her own life. There are other supposed attractions of this kind of resourcism. One is that, look, relaxing from the desert island scenario now, in a diverse society, in a diverse democracy, people differ about what they want in life, their conceptions of the good, their notions. They worship different gods, they worship different goods. And there isn't going to be any agreement at the level of society on people's being better or worse off if we think in those sort of ultimate terms. What people ultimately want from life, where they find salvation or secular equivalents of salvation, that's going to just completely divide us. So shove that aside and think about some basis for social unity that can be reasonably shared. And that's going to take us in the direction of some sort of resourcism as the measure for distributive justice. Another line is that, well, look, if we took the idea that it's going to be, how well off Bill Gates is, or how well off Dick Arneson is, or how well off you are, judged on some metric of the good life that we haven't elaborated yet, then that's going to inevitably involve society and the state as the agent of society to be making really kind of invasive and sort of maybe even disrespectful or insulting assessments of individual condition, right? If we will be perhaps, justice will be cranking out a recommendation that we should help Tom and that Sally and the rest of us should help Tom because Tom is unintelligent or weak or there's something defective about Tom such that he's not up to snuff in the ability to transform resources into welfare, and he needs a sort of special boost. And we don't want the state, that sort of judgment and that kind of assessment, that's not really the business of the state. So that's another background thought for this resourcism. I don't think the response, but my response. I think the responsibility issue, however we're going to deal with that, is just orthogonal to the question about resources versus welfare as the right way to think about the measure. Responsibility considerations by themselves do not justify resources as the measure. Just take money, power to purchase any of an array of goods that's for sale on a market as an all-purpose resource. What people are enabled to be and do with their cash holdings depends on their circumstances, including their personal traits, right? So just imagine now, we thought that the justice standard was going to be appealing to some notion of equality or equalizing transfers. That's what we should be doing if we're looking across the different islands and wondering who owes what to whom. But if we thought of this in terms of resources, equal bank account wealth or equal money or something, then we note that since people are different and since their circumstances are different, even in this sort of very simple scenario of the islands, then the resources that we give will be differentially valuable to people. Just a simple example would be, we've got two people. One is legless and one has a set of functioning legs and are otherwise similar, and we give them equal amounts of money. But the person who's legless then will have to spend most of his money with getting crutches or getting some kind of mobility device or getting a prosthetic or something, whereas the person with good legs gets that for free and is able to use the money for all sorts of things, right? So the idea is that the equality in any sense that matters to us isn't really being achieved here. Also, on the other side, the idea that personal responsibility should play some role in this what do we fundamentally owe one another theory. There's an attraction to that, but it's not captured, I think, by this idea of, well, we achieve a distribution of resources, and then what people do with the resources is up to you. So society is responsible for a fair distribution of resources over time, and then people do what they want with their resources, and whether they end up with a squalid life or a good life, that's sort of on them. It's their responsibility. But the concern for responsibility doesn't get you to a resource ethic, because look, if our idea was equality of resources, people can differ in their responsibility characteristics in ways that should matter from the standpoint that they look unequal in their resource holdings, and so it looks as though there ought to be an equalizing transfer, but it can be that they differ in their responsibility characteristics, or even if their responsibility characteristics are the same, their responsibility characteristics may be such that an equalizing transfer maybe isn't recommended. So maybe people, Smith and Jones have very unequal resources, but the background story is that they both engaged in high-stakes gambling from which one emerged poor and one emerged rich. And it's not that the background story of how you got to your present plight maybe completely takes away any kind of obligation to help. Maybe people deserve second chances, maybe people deserve third chances and fourth chances and fifth chances. But it makes some difference to the moral urgency of the claim to aid, and just going to a resource metric doesn't help with that. So, the responsibility, one way to respond to the consideration about people are different in their traits, so resources it would be fetishistic to just look at the resource shares. We want to know what people are enabled to do and be with their resources. That takes us in the direction of a view in the family of a capability view, or a real freedom view, or an opportunity view, right? Yeah, so the idea, real freedom here is the idea that I have formal freedom to go to Paris if there's no law against it, or perhaps if nobody will interfere if I give it a try. I have the real freedom to go to Paris if there's some choice of action I could now make and execute that would actually get me to Paris, right? And so if we're concerned with, so we might think of justice as concerned with, some notion in this family of opportunity or real freedom or capability. What do you have the capability to be and do, given your resource share, given the circumstances that you're in, including your personal traits, especially the personal traits that just fell on you from the skies rather than the ones that in some sense, in any plausible sense, can be thought to be your responsibility. So then the proposal is that the society's responsibility has to do with providing people a fair share of capabilities. Capabilities are going to be sensitive to differences across individuals, so we don't get into the fetishism of resources. But then again, we'll retain this notion that given a fair distribution of capabilities, or maybe a fair distribution of capabilities over time, what people actually end up with doing with the capabilities and the life they end up leading, again, that's on you. That's your responsibility. Again, this is only part of an answer. Real freedom here would need a metric. What determines whether, given that there are lots of things that you can do and there are lots of things that I can do and they only partially overlap, how do we make a judgment that overall you've got more real freedom than me, or less? We need some sort of measuring rod for that. There's an even more fundamental worry, though, at least it strikes me as fundamental, to the approach under review. If capability or opportunity or real freedom were what we really cared about ultimately, justice is a matter of getting people the fair shares of capability, whatever exactly that is, but it's getting people the opportunities. That's what really matters for its own sake. If that mattered for its own sake and was ultimately what we owed one another, then it should be just as much morally important and just as much an imperative to get people the fair shares of opportunities and capabilities, whatever is going to follow. And in particular, even in cases where you absolutely know for certain the capabilities that you get for somebody, genuine capabilities that really could enable the person to do and be a lot of things the person views as valuable, but they won't get anything, in fact, right? So Tom sees that Fred on his island is badly off and would be much better off. Tom makes up a care package with eggs and stuff in the basket and sends it ashore. But suppose before sending the boats off, resources that would be good for Tom, but he thinks that justice says they're owed to Fred in order to boost Fred's capability set and move in the direction of equal capabilities between Tom and Fred. But then suppose this is true. Tom knows for a fact that the capabilities are going to be not used. Maybe Fred has a superstition against using resources that wander up on the beach. Maybe they'll just be, wasted. We know for a fact Fred will be careless when he gets these resources. The eggs could give him a good omelet, but he's going to break the eggs, as he takes them up from the shore. It seems to me, if you know for a fact that the capabilities aren't going to get you anything, the obligation to supply the capabilities and the opportunities just disappears. It just extinguishes. But that couldn't be the case if what really mattered ultimately for its own sake were getting real freedom, capability, opportunity for welfare, whatever notion in that family you think is important. Again, there's some further examples in the notes. You can save Smith from a beating. We look on this island, we can see Smith is being chased around by some thugs. We could save him. We could send an arrow that would injure the thug and prevent the beating from taking place. So that will enhance an important capability, the capability not to be beaten up that Smith will then have. But suppose we know for a fact that if the thugs don't attack Smith, Smith will then administer a beating to himself of just the same severity for some silly reason. He's guilty about something. Seems to me, again, the obligation just extinguishes in that case. And again, we don't want to make a fetish of certainty. It seems to me it dampens with high probability also. If society arranges to build huge opera houses and staff them with great performers and musicians, so every person in society has the real freedom to experience great opera, it seems to me from the capability perspective, it should just be a don't care from the standpoint of social justice if nobody actually avails himself of the option and nobody actually goes to the operas. But still, marvelous capabilities are had by all. But I just want to balk at that. That just sounds wrong. But now we seem stuck. There were reasons, especially these personal responsibility considerations, that were pushing us in this direction towards the capability view. And now I've just rejected the capability view. So we've circled around like a dog chasing its tail, and we're back to the idea that justice has to look beyond the distribution of resources, opportunities, capabilities, and the like, to see to what extent these freedom enhancements actually succeed in enhancing the quality of someone's life. And you could have, just capability distribution, but squalid lives or not squalid lives. And the idea with this matters, right? So now we're looking behind the responsibilities. But then, we're back to these problems that pushed us towards resources in the first place. What's our response to them? So we're saying now, I think, that at the fundamental moral level, what we fundamentally owe one another must be, a good life, individual well-being, excellent quality of life. This is a misleading phrase, talking about getting well-being for people. It suggests that well-being or welfare is something like a juice that you could pour into containers, right? You could distribute well-being the way you sort of pour orange juice in a container. But of course, well-being is, broadly a valuable achievement, and it's the successful exercise of agency. So, getting well-being for people is going to be a matter of facilitating agency. It's not going to be a matter of just pouring juice in a container or something. But still, I'm going to use the same. I'm going to use the terminology. So again, we seem stuck. We're back to the idea that justice must look behind the distribution of resources. But now what do we say about the reasons that pushed us against that? One thing to say. There are recent voices in political philosophy, important voices, serious voices, that resist taking welfare as the measure of what we owe one another. But it seems to me most of these accounts and objections, if you listen to them, they're really objecting to one view or another of human well-being, and as the right way to think about social justice. And if we hear the objection in that way, then it's really a comparative thing. It's that we shouldn't take this conception of human well-being as the right measure for social justice. That would be a broken thermometer. But then that's because we've got on the wings some maybe unstated, better conception that's implicit or that's in the background. And so that can be then brought to the foreground. So a famous philosopher gives the example, imagine two people, Jack and Jill. This is arguing against the idea that desire satisfaction or life aim fulfillment is something that at the fundamental level we should be trying to equalize across people, or take as the measure